truly, truly as our community are indebted to having Rabbi Katz as the Mora d'Asra at Beth Abraham, known as Hertzberg's, and really as Mora d'Asra here for our community. It's really a blessing from Hashem, and we hope and we pray that Rabbi Katz is with us for many, many years, till 120 years, till the Mashiach comes. And now I want to introduce Rabbi Katz.
See how many faces I recognize over here. Okay, you talk to my wife. She's going to ask how you do. This is as far as let's put it this way. I have no business being here tonight, but there's a famous Jewish joke from the 19th century where somebody says, "What's that?" You're not that young. Yeah. Thanks a lot. I know I can always count on support from Shibby Garden. You know, but the famous story about a rabbi in Germany back in the 1800s when they started to go to college and he came back and they call him Dr. So-and-so. He said, "What are you a doctor of?" He says, "Philosophy." He says, "Was für crank is das? What kind of a sickness is philosophy?" So if that's what they say about philosophy, you can imagine what they do about history. Moreover, as I've said numerous times recently, I'm not interested in curing anybody of this particular illness. And I hope it's incurable. The fact, however, is that we've done this before, Jerry, in Shul. And because this is my show, it's somewhat of a smaller format. Usually when we have like a, let's say a 4th of July or a, Labor Day or something like that, an activity connected in the show. But this year, it's so morphed in such a way to make it more of a wider community kind of event. And we originally were going to do it in the show and just invite everybody from the community. Has to do with the fact, as everyone knows, that I'm doing these Saturday night lectures. And because Shomrei Emunah is kind enough to sponsor the whole thing, I have to work around their schedule. And it so happened that November 7th, tonight, is a schedule where they're off, meaning they're engaged. I can't use it. So it came together as a happy ending. So we were originally going to do it in Shul, in my Shul, on November 7th. And then we found out, because I was talking with Jerry about it in Shul, we and Tudor Heights share a common a precious asset. That's Menashe Shabtai. And he davens by us, but he works here. He's the head honcho of the kitchen. And he immediately said, "Why don't you do it in Tudor Heights?" And I said, "You got to be kidding." I mean, I wasn't even thinking about it. Next thing I know, Mrs. Aslow got involved. And the next thing I know, it's beyond my pay scale, and we're all here tonight. So I just want to, as always, thank all the physicians that are here. Jerry and I are closer and closer, and Dr. Young has saved my life on a number of occasions, as I'm sure it's true of many of you, and all the other physicians over here. And therefore, in that spirit, I say, Bruchim Habaim. And now let's get down to business. I have a talk which for me is a short talk. For me, it's a short talk. If Howard was here, usually I have like 10 pages in front of me. And now I have much fewer than that.
You have another busload of fans that are walking down the hall, so could you just schmooze a little bit before you jump into your
I see. He wants me to speak. Okay. Yes, you can ask me questions. That's in the Torah. It says, Nishmartem el nafsho seichem. He's asking me what you call a rhetorical question. That a person is supposed to take it. If you think about it theologically, and this is not something I wanted to talk about tonight, but we believe that God gave everybody who they are. And so, if that happened, he didn't do it for nothing, therefore you have to take care of it. It's as simple as that. I mean, that's how the ancients thought of these things. You understand? You're not here by accident, here by design. If you're here by design, you're supposed to try to maintain what he gave you, and everything emerges out of that. But why let me do the talking? Let me instead talk about the most famous doctor in Jewish history, I would argue, and that would be the Rambam. Usually anybody talk about famous Jewish doctor from the past, you immediately start thinking of Maimonides. All the hospitals and everything are named after Maimonides, as we all know. What's interesting to me, always as a historian, is that we have these figures that we know a whole lot about, but we know really nothing about. Meaning, you talk to people around Rambam, oh yeah, there's a school name, he was a famous guy. What do you know about the Rambam? I don't know, he lived long ago, He wrote some books, I think. He was a philosopher, I heard. What do you know about philosophy? I don't know, And that goes double for his career as a doctor, as a MD. And let me therefore get down to work and just hope that people who come in will pick it up as we start over here. But I want to talk tonight a little bit. If I do full justice to this subject, you'd have one of my 2-hour things. But let me do a fraction of that and talk about the Rambam and his capacity as an MD. And let me start off by saying that the Rambam's career as a doctor came later in life, as you'll see, and it was a b'diavad and not a l'chadchila. That's not what he planned to do with his life. Certain things happened which led to him sort of changing careers or adopting this particular medical career around the age of 40, roughly speaking. So that's interesting. I've known people, and you probably do also, who have made changes in life and became doctors, not in their 10s and 20s, but in their 30s and 40s. Do you know anybody? I know one or two. The late Dr. Baer in Baltimore, Ralph Baer, for example. And in the case of the Rambam, it's just very interesting. So let's talk about the guy, the man, the person himself, which I'm a historian. That's what I always find interesting. And the Rambam was born, we know now, in 1138, and he died in 1204. So he lived to be 66 years old. It's not a long life, it's not a short life. 66. Could have lived longer. What's really interesting, Rashi also lived to be 66. That's just to give you a figure. You know, if he would have lived another 10 years, Rashi, he would have done the Yerushalmi. Who knows? No, I'm serious. But, you know, these kind of things sort of matter. The Rambam was born in Cordoba in, there's Spain, of course, in the time when he was born. And as you can see, the Spanish Peninsula, well, I can't tell if I'm saying, well, I'll just describe it. It won't work. So he says, it's fine. Spain at that time didn't exist as a country, as you can see. It's okay. But you can see that it's all broken up into pieces. And basically, there's the southern piece and the northern pieces. The northern pieces are the Christian kingdoms. The southern piece is the Muslim. That's what Spain was once upon a time. The Muslims used to call it South Andalusia, which is why maybe you heard that name. And in the beginning, the Muslims conquered 99% in the 700s. But it's like a cancer. They left a little bit and then came back to bite them. That was Christianity. The 1% they didn't take counterattacked eventually and started 800 years of the Reconquest, the Reconquista. So it really went from 713 or so to 1492. Continual war. And at the time the Rambam was born, it was about half and half, as you can see over here. And he was born in the southern half in Cordoba, the Muslim part. His mother died in childbirth. It's just interesting, right? So Rambam grew up without a mother. It's just, you know, his father remarried and so forth, but it's not the same thing, of course. He was the only child from the first mother. The father remarried, and they had 3 more kids, 2 girls and a boy. So he had what we call half-brother, and that's who he is. Just to give you an idea of the relationship between these, the year that the Rambam was born, Yehuda Halevi wrote the Kuzari. That's it for it. Now, Yehuda Halevi, if you can look at this map in the middle, lived in the Christian part, in Toledo. So he's an Arab Jew, and the Jews there spoke Arabic like our parents spoke Yiddish. But it's already in the part that's no longer ruled by the Muslims. Just to give you a tiny bit of an idea of the milieu. The Rambam, by contrast, never moves to the Christian areas. Wouldn't think of it, as we'll see. Spain, prior to the Almohads, you had this map, the good old days. The Muslims, at the time I'm talking about when he was born, were still okay with the Jews. And the Jews, therefore, had this famous cultural situation, which we refer today as the golden age of the Jews in Spain. It wasn't as golden as people might imagine, but still it was fairly good. And I would think the most important characteristic for us to take away from this would be the idea of Torah Derech Eretz, as we would call today, or Torah Mata, which is that the people, including the big rabbis, had a very good secular education when they could, as well as a very good Jewish education. The Rambam certainly came from such an intellectual background. Notice his parents, his father, grandfather, and all that had a very solid yeshiva education. Just to give you an idea of what I'm talking about, the father, his Rebbe, was the Rimigash. In other words, he learned in the most important yeshiva in Spain. But he also was an MD. So in other words, he obviously acquired a secular education alongside Jewish education. And in Spain, they worked it out in such a way that it wasn't a contradiction. At the age of 10 years old, everything changed. The Taliban took over, or Al-Qaeda, if you want, or the ISIS. They called that time the Almohads. Okay? And the reason I tell you that is, right away, see, you can see on the map, the southern half of Spain was now taken over by these people from North Africa. And the first thing he did was prohibit Judaism and Christianity. They killed a lot of them, and they also said that anybody who stays has to convert. Okay? Anybody who stays has to convert. In fact, the Almohads even said you can't leave. And so you can die or convert. That's what it boiled down to. Now, I want you to think about I mention this because I like the human being side of this. Think about the fact you have a 10-year-old and it's a wonderful world, and all of a sudden it isn't. It's a young age to experience this kind of profound impact, but that's what they had to do. The parents, his family, moved away from Cordoba because that was a big center and the Arabs are watching. Notice the Taliban were very strong over there. And they tried to move to places in Spain which they hadn't conquered yet, or at least it wasn't particularly strong, especially to Almeria, which you can see hopefully in the map there is all the way to south of Spain. Can you see it? Because I can't. And eventually, however, the Almohads took over that part also, what you and I call Gibraltar and all that area. And so the family moves around in Spain. Something along the lines of why my mother had to run away from the Germans, always under a different identity in another town from here to here to here. And after 9 years of moving around, pretending to be Muslims, actually, I mean, that's what he had to do. It's a big debate whether they formally converted to Islam or never, but all you have to, in order to consider formally convert to Islam, all you have to say is, I believe in Islam. The Shahada, there's no God but Allah, and Muhammad is the Prophet. If you just say those words, right? Yeah, okay, you have to, thank you. Give us an example, right? And no, he's right. There's a formula to it. But it happens to be machlokas aposkim among the Muslims, by the way. There are those who hold that once is enough. And the point is, it was real tough. So imagine a guy who's 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19 years old, living this kind of a life. And imagine someone coming from a very strong rabbinic, Jewish elite background, with a remarried family. The kids are being born, 2 sisters and a brother, and trying to stay indoors as much as possible, I assume. And also a father and a son who are committed to a very rigorous learning schedule. You get what I'm saying? In other words, it's not only they stay out of the way, but the Rambam from early on clearly was one of these kids that took to the learning, and clearly in a very systematic and disciplined way, well beyond most of us. The Rambam emerges throughout his life as a math and science person. He had no time for history, for poetry, or any of that kind of junk. He would think it's junk. Not liberal arts at all. He really writes that history is a piece of junk. Math and science, it doesn't get better than that. Metaphysics, logic, questions, you've made his day. So a person like that can indeed say, with the father, from 9 to 12 we're learning Gemara, from 12 to 1 we're doing math, from 1 to 2, homeschool. Now, so the Rambam is homeschooled. Now, no yeshiva, all that kind of stuff. In the year 1160, so that would put him at the age of 22, just to give you an idea, they run away to Morocco, to Fez, which would seem to be running from the frying pan into the fire. I can only assume that they figured that at that time the conditions, the ruler had died and was replaced by another guy, that they must have had information that it's less stringent of a hashgacha, of the Islamic hashgacha in Fez. And so there they remained for a number of years. I would say that, every once in a while there were persecutions in Morocco. Also, he spends 5 years there. So here's a guy who learned from the year 25 to 27 years old, doing exactly what I said. However, you can't totally hide. And so the Rambam, he had to get out in society, probably had to attend services in the mosque and that sort of thing, for all we know. He seems to have also been interested, because he's in science, going to what the equivalent of a university was there at that time, and attending lectures in science and in medicine. Okay? Philosophy, metaphysics, physics, such as it was at that time, and medicine, such as it was at that time. Meaning, he's just interested, lishma. There are some people like that. Wasn't planning to practice. He never understood the practice. If you ask him what he does for a living, the family did jewels. It's something Jews do, right? They're in the jewelry business. It's a Yiddish thing, because you run away, you can always take the schayr with you. And that's what they did. Was he a good businessman? Was it business? No way of knowing. We know eventually his brother took over the business and was the one who ran with the ball and was matzliach. So that's totally understandable. It's two brothers. One is more the egghead type, and the other is the practical businessman type. That's who the Rambam is. Now, as I said before, he was just taking this, but things got tough eventually. The Muslims, let's put it this way, started watching more closely if people practiced Judaism, And at the age of 27, 5 years there, he was actually accused of secretly being Jewish and practicing Judaism. And he had a friend who was a Muslim who testified on his behalf that he was not. But the family flees Morocco because he can't handle that. They leave from Ceuta. You see where it is on the map? And the bottom, it's on the top of Africa. It still today belongs to Spain. It's in Morocco, but it's an enclave. Spain, even today in 2015, owns 2 towns in North Africa. Some of us were there, Ceuta and Melilla. And by the way, there are Jewish communities and synagogues in both places. There's a community and a synagogue in Ceuta, and there's a community and a synagogue in Melilla. I just didn't go with my group there because you'd have to fly by plane for an hour or something. But there it is. So they run away from there. So he's 27 years old. And like many, they make Aliyah. They try to make it, but they can't make it economically. They move to Israel. Okay? At the time the Rambam comes to Israel, which is in 1165, it's the Crusader Kingdom of Jerusalem. Okay? So Israel, Palestine, that time, didn't look too different from Israel today. Now, you know, right? Which is why the Muslims in their writings always talk about Israel as a Crusader Kingdom. The borders are not that different. You know, there's some, but you understand what I'm saying. At the height, I can't remember which map it is, but you know, there were a bunch of Crusader states at the height, and then later on they started to go down. So the Crusaders originally wouldn't allow Jews, but after a while they realized they couldn't get along without minorities, and therefore they just, you know, don't ask, don't tell. And the main Jewish center at that time was not Jerusalem, Akko. Isn't that interesting? Because the port city could do business. Second largest Jewish center, Tyre, Tzor, in Lebanon. Seems funny to us today. I only know because I had a grad student last year in Hopkins that I work with, and he's doing his dissertation on the Jewish community in the 12th century in Tyre, of all things. And so here's a guy in his 20s that they make Aliyah, 27 years old, as I said before. At the age of 28, I mean, he goes to Yerushalayim, he goes, you can't make it, you can't make a living. And so at the age of 28, Maimonides and his family moved to Egypt, which is nearby. First to Alexandria, and then to Fustat, which is next to Cairo. Fustat to Cairo is like Pikesville to Baltimore, right? Today it's part of Cairo. Now, just as Pikesville is really part of Baltimore, really. Now, what's going on in all these years? You have 2 brothers, and a father who's getting older. The brother, the younger brother, David, is obviously for business. So the Rambam sit and learn all day. Not everybody's built that way, but some people are built that way. Correct? Some people are really built that way. He was no question about it. He was built that way. And so he can sit down and just spend 12 hours, you know, learning whether math or Gemara or something like that. And clearly he has this very disciplined, scientific kind of a view of all subjects. Probably the philosophical training impacted on the Gemaras. In fact, in my question is no question about that. And at the age of 30 years old, he finished his Pirush HaMishnah. So just think, this is something the guy wrote in his 20s under difficult conditions. Who today writes Kahati when you're in your 20s and finishes at 30? But that's what it was. And it's even more than that, because Kahati really just copied from what others said and put it together very nicely. When the Rambam moved in, it was Karka Basul. At the time the Rambam wrote, there were no commentaries on the Mishnah. So it's basically, some of you won't understand what I'm saying, but just imagine a text with no Rashi or anything like that. So he filled in. It's quite an interesting undertaking for a guy in his 20s, living under very complex conditions. This is written in Fez, in Akko, eventually in Alexandria. As long as it was Morocco, it's really written with the curtains shut. So this is Anne Frank writing the Pirush on the Mishnah. It's quite interesting, which is a huge undertaking. It's the first of his 3 great books. Having spent his 20s on the Pirush Mishnah, he now settled down in Egypt. He spent his 30s writing the Mishnah Torah. He finished it when he was 39 years old, which again is just remarkable. Some of us know, at least what I'm talking about, the Rambam's famous compendium of all Jewish law, Mishnah Torah. Which great English or American lawyer, professor wrote the whole law in his 30s? You understand? So clearly this is somebody who's sitting down and can sit down at 8 in the morning and work for 12 hours straight or something like that. An enormous amount of research and second of all, the ability to synthesize it, but I don't want to go off too much on a tangent about that. And so he finished in 1177 at the age of 39, which is remarkable. Now, the Rambam strongly believed you're not allowed to take money for teaching Torah or acting as a judge or being a rabbi. Okay, my shul still operates on that principle. So how does he make a living? How you make a living? So the main money was from the brother, who they put into the whole family had like a certain piece of the business, and they invested, so to speak, with him, and he put it investing in the jewels, and that's how they so imagine like a little family corporation, and that's how they did it. But there's a famous story. Shalom Aleichem writes, if I was Rothschild, I'll be richer than Rothschild because I could also teach some classes on the side. So it sounds better if you're a Malamed in Eastern Europe. But anyhow, that's exactly what the Rambam did. He taught on the side. You get it? Now, he taught on the side. He taught what? Math, science, maybe some very primitive med stuff. You get it? Because he was interested anyway. And then you're not taking money for teaching Torah. He couldn't do what we do today, which is to tutor somebody in Gemara or something like, you're not allowed to take money for that. It's a very strong principle of his. Not everybody agreed with it, but he did. And so you got to make your money teaching other things like that. Now, that's what it is. He also marries well. Right? Here's a guy, well, it was around, it's not clear to us, but it seems like he got married when he was like 28, 29, 30, something like that. And what's interesting about this marriage is that he got married in 1165, 66. The only child we know they have who survived was born 20 years later into the marriage. So it's just interesting, right? He got married in 1166, and his son was born in 1186. And his son was 19 when the father died. It's Avram ben Rambam. Now, I don't know. Nobody knows. They speculate. Maybe they had other kids who died young. And in those days, anything's possible. Maybe he didn't. But it's just Hello Doverhu, that's how it works out. Okay? Now, around this time, his brother died, perished at sea, taking all the family's money with him, went broke. You see, he thought he had a great idea, which was not a bad idea at all, which is to go to India. There you could buy the stuff real cheap and sell it well and all that kind of stuff. So it was, but the reason it was a good idea was it was a high risk. And he took a risk and it didn't work. And the ship drowned in the Indian Ocean and he took all the money with him. Now, this led to shock and deep depression at the age of 40. I can't see it, but you're going to see now a famous letter the Rambam writes over here to somebody talking about how he reacted to his brother's death. And if you look over there, he talks about depression and boils and skin rashes and things like this, all of which he's telling you, the greatest misfortune ever befall me. My life, he writes to Rabbi, was demise of my brother, and so carrying the money left me with a little daughter and a widow, meaning my brother's little daughter and my brother's widow. On the day I received terrible news, I fell ill, remained in bed for a year. Right, so what do you call that? For a year, suffering from a sore, boils, fever, and depression, and was almost given up. So he experienced this stuff firsthand. The Rambam is not simply an ivory tower scholar who lived all of his life that way. 8 years have passed, and I'm still mourning unable consolation, and so on and so forth. So it was a blow. And by the way, you see, he was, what should I say, a high-strung type individual? Is that what you say? Whatever, someone who, here I am in Tudor Heights. I don't know what I'm talking about, but some of you know better what I'm talking about. If he reacted to this with a breakdown, and that's what it is for a year, call it what you want, Now, he eventually pulls himself together. So here's somebody at the age, this happened when he's around 40. So all of a sudden, the Rambam isn't just a figure out there. He pulls himself together because he had to. And he begins a regular medical practice because the money's gone. And so what that means in those days is all the stuff you've picked up over the years in a sort of unprofessional way, now he said like this, now I have to crack down on this stuff and attack it professionally. In those days, you didn't go to medical school the way we have today. You had to master the literature on the subject. And so if you're a guy like Rambam, that's the one skill you have, right? And he could master the literature on the subject. And he had, in the course of his years, always liked to talk to other doctors. In other words, he was an amateur. And I'm not like this, but I have friends that are like this. They're not doctors, but they like to talk to physicians, and not, in a crank way, in a real way, and pick up information here and there. And now he's got to make this into something real. Okay, it takes a while to build a successful practice. And from the age of 41 to 66. his practice will grow slowly but surely. So the Rambam is a guy who becomes an MD after he's 40 years old and will spend the rest of his life working on his practice. It's just interesting. In his 40s, he puts together his last book, The Guide for the Perplexed, which he finishes around the age of 50 or 51. Now, this was a philosophy book written for a medical student of his, with whom he had a great deal of kesher, as we would say today. And, of course, it's a very difficult book, but he deals with question of Judaism and philosophy, or science, as it was called in those days. The way they define science is very different than we do today, obviously. Now, each book, therefore, that he wrote, the 3 books took a decade. Took him 10 years to put together the Mishnah commentary. Took him 10 years to put together the law code. And took him about 10 years to put together the philosophy book. These are 3 huge works in Judaism that are still used today. As you'll see, he doesn't write any books after his medical practice takes off. He picks up some VIP patients. Right, this was his big break. Most significantly, the Rambam picked up as a patient and eventually as a friend, a consultant, the most important Palestinian of the 12th century. Right, Abdul Rahim ibn Abi el-Bayisuni, who's more famously known as the Qadi al-Fadil. Now, the Qadi is like a rabbi, Islamic clergyman, but more like a posek, not just a rabbi, posek. And al-Fadil was his title. And the Qadi al-Fadil is one of the most famous people in Islamic history. And he was from a Palestinian rabbinical family, if I can use the Islamic term, from Ashkelon, although Baisuni means from Beis Shan. And very interesting figure. And he is well educated in the Islamic stuff. And he moves to Egypt at a young age and becomes a bureaucrat. He knows how to write very well, communicate, and he rises in the bureaucracy there over the course of many years and through many different rulers. And when a lot of people are killed, he's one of the people who are not killed when they have these changes of government, like they still do in Egypt, and becomes indispensable, okay? And eventually becomes Grand Vizier under Saladin. Egypt, and I'm going to tell you, it's really funny in terms of current events. Egypt for 200 years before this was ruled, although that's coming a little bit later. But okay, you can keep that. That's fine. Egypt for 300 years was ruled by Shiites. Isn't that interesting? A lot of the population was Sunni, but the ruling class, the Fatimid dynasty as they call them, and the big shots and the middle class were Shiites. Now, the guys at the bottom weren't crazy about this, but this is the way it was. If you would be a general or this, that, and the other. On rare occasions, they would take a Sunni guy to have a position in the government, especially like I'm talking about as a bureaucrat, pencil pusher, person who can write memoranda and things like that. He worked in what they call the Office of the Army, the Defense Ministry, and eventually into legal stuff. But he was a Sunni. The dynasty I'm talking about, the Fatimids, were not strong enough to fight the Christians. The Christians started invading Egypt, Almaric, the Crusaders. And it was a good chance they were going to take it over right around the time the Rambam showed up in Egypt. And the result was that Shiite rulers lost their legitimacy as being able to defend the country. And these Kurdish Sunni guys, you and I call Saladin, they rescued everybody. They came in and took over Egypt and kicked the Crusaders out and saved Egypt, as it were. And Saladin was therefore the ruler and his children after him for many centuries. And they had this empire they can see over here called the Ayyubid Empire on the right hand, which is pretty big. And they were Kurdish. Isn't that interesting? A Kurdish dynasty ruled the Middle East. Now, he usually wasn't in Egypt. Saladin had fighting the Crusaders and running around fighting others. And so basically he said like this, you, Al-Fadil, you be the prime minister and run the whole country for me. You take care of everything from top to bottom, the taxes, the administration, and I trust you to convert everybody way back to Sunni. And because I know how you do it. And he did it. Not overnight. He did very moderately. He built a yeshiva here and a yeshiva there and a kollel there. That's exactly what he did. And it took like a generation or so. And bislachwise, they got rid of all the Shiites. Until today, as a result, Egypt is a bastion of the Sunni religion. It's the big holdout against Iran. And believe me, everything I'm telling you, the Iranians know, and they say, that son of a gun, he stole it from us and we want it back. So if you remember a couple of years ago, the head of Ahmadinejad went one time, if you remember this, a couple of years ago, went on a trip to Egypt to kiss up to Morsi. Because after all, they have a lot in common. They hate the Jews. But the Hamon Am, the public there, threw shoes at him because they know what he's coming for. You get it? So this goes over here. So this guy was a big deal. And Saladin, by the way, said a great line. He said, I conquered Egypt. He meant from the Shiite to the Sunnis, not with my sword, but with the pen of Al-Fadil. And this guy became his patient. So you see where I'm going with all this. He actually hooked up. Now, what does it mean to be a physician for a VIP in those days? It's not you stay in the office for a minute every 10 months or something like this. He's the personal attendant upon him. He tells him what to eat. He guides him in all kind of lifestyle, exercises, diet, all sorts of things like that. So what I'm trying to say is like this: the doctor and the patient spend a lot of time with each other. You get it? And so here's this guy who's a refugee, a Jewish refugee. He shows up over there, and he only started his practice, like I said, when he was around 40 years old. But somehow or other, he picked up a reputation. Nobody knows how it exactly happened. But all of a sudden, this guy's on his Rolodex. And you tell me, if he's the number one macher in Egypt, and you have him as a patient, who else do you have as a patient? You see what I'm saying? And this is the key to the career of the Rambam. And believe me, it came in very handy, because once his practice started to grow, his reputation for the first time, especially in the Muslim world, started to grow. This was not good. And the reason it wasn't good is because he'd been a Muslim back in Morocco. You said 1 time or 3 times. And so once this got out in the papers, he said, Ibn Umar, I know him, he was a Muslim back there. And you're Chayav Misa. Right? You're liable death penalty if you once were Muslim and then switch back. And it came, and a guy did accuse him in the courts in Cairo. But if you're friends with Al-Fadil, so what he did was he issued a ruling, because he was the Qadi, so he was the posting over there. A forced conversion doesn't count, and therefore what was done over there is there, but he saw that was going to get a lot of people riled up, so they simply did a Jack Pollock. They pulled the case from the docket, so it never went to court. Now, in this year, he starts acquiring other patients, because Saladin came from a big family. He had 17 sons. Okay, God knows how many daughters, but they don't count. He had 17 sons. He had brothers, friends, and relatives. So we find that already in 1183. So how old is the Rambam? He's in his 40s. So he's 45. Yeah. So he's 45, and he's already writing a book on cohabitation, not on sex, for Saladin's nephew Al-Mansur, who was the governor of Egypt in 1183 to 1185. And no, it's not what you think. He says like this. He says like this. This is the title of the book. You can read it. He says, the great Prince Al-Mansur has a lot of concubines, and it's hard to maintain his lifestyle. And I told him, wait a second. I told him that as far as health is concerned, you shouldn't engage in such a lifestyle. But he told me that he's not interested in my advice. He only wants, in other words, he's not interested in changing his lifestyle. And consequently, he wants medical help